At one time, the church used to be considered a safe haven, a sanctuary. It was the one place where you could go that still felt safe, that was considered holy. But in Biden's America, all that is changing.
Make no mistake, this decision is a culmination of a deliberate effort over decades of set balance of our law.
Since the repealing of Roe v. Wade, attacks on churches and crisis pregnancy centers by the angry woke mob have increased.
The violent pro-abortion group Jane's Revenge, which some have labeled as domestic terrorism, now declares it is open season on pro-life groups.
These sacred institutions have been vandalized, and some female protesters have even gone as far as to strip, yes, I said strip, in church in order to get their point across. And what is their point? It appears they're furious with Christians and the church for our stance on abortion. They're angry because we believe that everyone, and I mean everyone, deserves a chance to live, and that women shouldn't be able to murder their baby for the sake of convenience. Apparently, that is controversial in today's crazy world. Apparently, loving Jesus and following the Word of God makes you a radical in today's America. On today's show, we're going to be unpacking the attacks the left has been waging on the church in the United States and how we as Christians should respond. This is Church and State, and I'm your host, Lucas Miles.
My name is Lucas Miles. I'm an ordained minister and best-selling author. The church has been invaded. By whom? Same ideology that's attacking our state, Marxism.
They want a church that bows down to the state. They want a church that worships the state.
So if you want to stay informed on the most critical issues regarding religious freedom and the Christian faith, then you've come to the right place. This is Church and State.
All right, welcome back. We've got a great show ahead of us. You know, some of this is going to be difficult to watch. I just want to warn you up front about that, but I believe it's important for Christians and people of faith that we don't put our heads in the sand and pretend like there isn't a spiritual or physical battle that's going on, that's being waged against the church right now. You know, I can remember years ago, it was on my first trip to Africa. I was traveling around my host and dear friend, Pastor George from Nairobi, Kenya, and I was there for like maybe 16 days. We were preaching at a different church almost every single night throughout East Africa, Kenya, Uganda. I can remember being shocked at first by the security at the churches over there. Every church would have one or two armed guards out front, and some of these guys are holding AK-47s as they're keeping watch over the church and its members during the service. Now you might think that sounds a little intense, but the church in Africa has a long history of persecution from groups like Boko Haram and others.
Another bloody day.
Dozens of people have been killed in a church attack.
Gunmen opened fire at a church in Nigeria.
These terrorist organizations are known for shooting up services, killing pastors, kidnapping children. A few years back, we had one of our church members that was killed by Boko Haram in a shopping mall in Kenya. Another one of the churches that we had worked with and sent team members to in the past had a hand grenade rolled down the middle aisle that exploded in the middle of the service. You know, perhaps I'll talk more about these things on a future episode, but I say all this now to say that America used to be the place where you could go to church without having to worry about being assaulted or having the service disrupted by extremists. That was something that happened in foreign lands and places like Africa. Now, to be clear, thankfully, at least at this point here in America, we're mostly dealing with graffiti, protesters, and other disruptions to our service. But the protests and attacks in churches and against churches are increasing. And I think it's important that you know what's going on, and especially you pastors out there, what you can do about it. Okay, so with that, let's get into the show. You know, as I mentioned in the opener, Roe being overturned was exactly what the left needed to begin justifying attacks on churches. You know, if you understand Marxism, what you understand is that the church stands as an obstacle to the Marxist agenda. Unless the church is removed or at least hijacked and converted over to a Marxist way of thinking, then Marxism can't thrive in a society. For a long time in America, it has been the church and the family that has prevented a socialist takeover from happening in this country. So when Roe was overturned, it gave the fuel that the left needed in order to incite all these, what Lenin would call useful idiots in this country, who are willing to take to the streets to fight for a cause, you know, to push back against institutions like the church. And so they used the power behind Roe being overturned to incite protests, vandalizing, and other stunts in the church. And this is exactly what happened in the largest church in this country, Lakewood Church in Houston, Texas, where several individuals from a group known as Texas for Abortion showed up at Joel Osteen's service. I got a video clip here. This is what happened.
It's my body, my choice. It's my body, my choice.
Major drama at Lakewood Church today.
Hell no. My body, my choice. I am who I say I am. I do what I say I can do because I have a choice.
You certainly don't see this every day in the sanctuary.
I have a choice.
You know, this is hard to watch. I mean, especially as a Christian and as a pastor myself, seeing this sort of behavior. I mean, first of all, kudos to Pastor Osteen for keeping it together.
I know this. I'm glad to be in the house of the Lord.
Obviously, you know, Lakewood is a giant arena. This used to be a basketball stadium. These women are fairly close to the front. I mean, they're not front row by any means, but it looks like they're within the first 30 rows or so. For him to, I mean, he had to be able to see them, hear them, and to be able to just speak over that. That's exactly what needs to happen. And what I love about this is when you're watching the video, you don't see anybody from the church attack these women. You don't see them yell at them. You don't see them to tell them to sit down. You see no anger or animosity. The people were only focused on what their pastor was saying. And when he just starts kind of speaking over them and kind of stirring the people up, they just start clapping and cheering that it's great to be in the house of God. And it's interesting here that, you know, even the left's attempts at trying to disrupt church or try to disrupt the worship of Jesus, in my opinion, all this did was exemplify the real character. I mean, it exposed who's got a heart for God and who doesn't. It exposed who's willing to walk in dignity and who isn't. They weren't able to unlock some sort of, you know, anger and rage from the Christians and this that's pent up or something like that. Christians responded the way that you would expect them to. They responded in love. They focused on what was important, and they allowed security to kind of usher these women out as they continued to praise God. And I think that's what has to happen. You know, I would encourage pastors, though, watching this, I'm sure we have a lot of church leaders that might be tuning in here to this, that you have to think about this stuff. This is a tough thing to navigate around. This isn't just a typical security issue. I've encouraged churches as I've, you know, traveled around the country talking about these things. This is one reason why you need to make sure you have women on your security team. You know, this becomes a situation with a lot of exposure, whether lawsuits or whatever, when you have women that are taking off their clothes to protest in the middle of a service. I know this is out of the box, and hopefully this does not happen in churches all around the country. But we have to start expecting, as the church gets brighter, for darkness to try to get darker, and for, you know, more out of the box attacks to happen against churches.
Tell that Nazi to come out!
You have to talk with your teams about that. You have to be prepared for that, because this is the new America that we live in right now, unfortunately, with this resurgence in Marxism in our nation. They're going to try to tear down everything that they can that's trustworthy, everything that stands for absolute truth, everything that stands for the family, everything that stands for, they're going to do their best to try to tear this down. Here's another example. This is a pro-life man who is attending some sort of rally or event. There are some pro-abortion protesters. And I like the term pro-abortion better than pro-choice, because I think it says more about what's really behind their line of thinking. So let's take a look at this clip here.
Disrespectful. This is a hate crime. Do you realize you guys are committing a hate crime right now? You guys, if this was a Quran, you would not have done that. You would not have done this if this was a Quran.
You're so
what you did, give me my Bible back. That is a hate crime.
And not only are they just heckling and yelling and cussing at him, but they actually go so far as to take his Bible.
She is not going to do that. That right there is a hate crime. That is a hate crime. That is ungodly. That is wrong. I can't believe these people. I can't believe that people would be.
Now, I just want to say, like, as a pastor, like, my Bible's like really, really important to me. Now, I have multiple Bibles, but I have one Bible that has like, it's got all my little notes in it. It's got all, you know, my handwritten things over, you know, 20 some years of ministry. And it means a lot. And I take that to events, I preach with it. And to think that somebody's going to pull this away, it's not just a book. That's not just something you can go order again on Amazon. For a lot of people that are taking notes, I mean, that's a life's work of study that they're putting into that. And you hear this Christian make the comment during this. He says, you wouldn't do that if that was a Quran. He said, this is a hate crime. And he's absolutely right. This is a hate crime. You know, taking somebody's religious book, throwing it on the ground, kicking it around, tearing pages out of it. And what you see at the end is them eventually throwing it in a porta-john, throwing it literally in human feces. So he's unable to go and get it. So he's unable to retrieve it. That is a hate crime. And these are the type of attacks that we are seeing increase in America against Christians. Now, again, this isn't persecution so far, thank God that it's not persecution, beheadings and burning people at the stakes and things that have happened in the past against Christians. But this is where it starts. And if we are not outraged by this, if we don't look at this and say, this can't happen, we're not gonna stand for this in America. We're not gonna stand for this in a place with religious freedom. We're not gonna stand for this in a place that was built and established upon a Judeo-Christian framework. If we're not gonna get frustrated now, then we're just gonna continue to allow Marxists to just have more and more ground until eventually what this leads to is persecution on a much broader scale. And this is why we have to be in tune to this. This is why, as much as I would love to just be preaching the gospel to you right now, this is why we have to talk about these things, because these things matter. If America stops being a place where I can freely worship, if America stops being a place where I can freely read my Bible in public, or I can go to some event with my Bible in hand, if we can't do that anymore, then sharing your faith, of course, that's not gonna be able to happen. I was talking to a friend of mine who's, this guy's an influencer on TikTok, and he's got thousands and thousands of followers, probably 500,000 followers on YouTube. And he's been doing this for some time, younger guy. And he shared with me, he said, Lucas, he goes, I never was really that political. I was never really involved with this. But he goes, as I started seeing more and more of my videos about faith topics censored, he goes, I realized that if I don't start getting political, then I'm not going to be able to be spiritual. And I think that's a really, sobering thought. And look, the gospel is not a political tool. It's not a political message. But as long as we have rights as citizens in this nation to stand up for the freedoms that we have to utilize those rights. We have to, take the liberties that we do have, utilize those to the full extent possible of the law in order to also give place for the spiritual aspects, for the religious aspects of the things as Christians that we want to be able to share and that we believe in. For a long time, Hollywood has already treated Christians as the brunt of the joke. They're always, if there is a Christian character, which there rarely is in storylines, they're always either the judgmental person or the idiot or, the fool or something like that.
My mother always told me that even when things seem bad, there's someone else who's having a worse day, like being stung by a bee or getting a splinter, or being chained to a wall in someone's sex dungeon.
But I think now what we're seeing is sort of this mentality creep out in the general public, where it's somehow accepted to marginalize Christians. It's somehow accepted to, have this sort of behavior that even if it goes as far as to, destroying a religious book, that's somehow okay. I mean, how did we get to this point in America? This is the nation where, it was God and country. And now it seems like it's just statism. Now it seems like the new God is just the leftist state. And if you worship anything else, it's not accepted, and you're gonna have to pay a price for it. If you follow my work, and if you follow some of my social media handles, maybe you saw this, but I was in DC when the leak came out that Roe v. Wade was potentially gonna be overturned. And I was actually having dinner with some friends a couple blocks away from the Supreme Court. This gal's reading, some updates on her phone, and everybody was kind of working in the media that was there, so they were very in tune with these things, and she just kind of gasps, and we're all like, what is it? And she starts reading the article about Roe potentially being overturned and this leak, the briefing that happened. And so we were about 3 blocks away, so of course we finished up dinner and drove down to the Supreme Court. And we were probably some of the first maybe 100 people that were there. It was almost all protesters initially that showed up, and slowly you started seeing more and more pro-life groups and Christian groups that arrived.
Abortion is violent!
Since that time, I've been following the response to Roe that the pro-abortion movement is having. And this isn't just an ideological response, it's not a philosophical response. I mean, look, there have been plenty of times as Christians and conservatives that we haven't gotten our way. There's been plenty of times politically where something comes out. I mean, I can remember, during the Obama administration, there would just seem like one thing after another, and also here during the Biden administration, we're seeing one thing after another that is coming out of this administration that as a Christian, as a conservative, that I don't like. I'm against, I don't stand for it. I think it's the wrong move for the country. But are you seeing Christians march out in the streets, burn down buildings, attack cities, go into Democratic headquarters and cause all sorts of problems? No, you're not seeing that. Why? Because that's not how conservatives and Christians operate.
We are here today to make a political revolutionary statement on this 4th of July to burn the American flag. The United States of America is irredeemable and is guilty of war crimes and violence.
I want to show you how the left operates. I have a few tweets here. These are just, quick surface. If you search these words, you're going to probably find even more of them. But take a look at this. If the anti-choice folks, again, here's a shift. It's no longer pro-life. The left is now calling conservatives anti-choice. It has nothing to do with it. Instead of calling us pro-life, because that has a positive orientation to it, they came up with a negative descriptor, which is anti-choice. They said if the anti-choice folks could picket and protest at Planned Parenthood and women's health centers, shouldn't pro-choice people be able to picket and protest at evangelical churches, which is exactly what we saw happening at that first clip at Lakewood, and also the homes of ministers? So now they're literally encouraging people, inciting people to show up to pastors' houses to start terrorizing them on their front lawn, as they did with Supreme Court justices.
You don't get to take away my bodily autonomy and enjoy your Saturday night at home.
Just because that's what it takes, right? In order to get your point across. Here's another one. At this point, burning down churches would be an acceptable way to protest. You read that right. Now, I pulled this tweet after it's been online already for about 2 weeks. Literally says at this point, burning down churches would be an acceptable way to protest. I can't tell you how many tweets or posts or Facebook posts or TikTok posts that I've had pulled down where I've simply shared a Bible verse or I've simply shared truth from scripture about a political talking point, whether it be sexuality, gender, marriage, etc. And those things are pulled down. But here, Twitter is allowing a post that is literally calling for burning down America's church buildings, and that doesn't get censored. Nobody pulls that down. That gets to stay online. Here's one more. We need to abolish religion, attack the churches hard, make them afraid, make them ashamed, harass and shame and intimidate the hell out of politicians and right-wing Christo-fascists. And it needs to be a coordinated attack, in bold letters, in large, massive numbers. Everyone armed. Don't vote, revolt. I just want to let that sink in for a second. And again, this post calling for people to attack hard, to abolish religion, to show up at churches, to intimidate the quote hell out of politicians and right-wing, what they call Christo-fascists. This is exactly what fascism does. It uses force and intimidation in order to suppress ideas and suppress people groups. And here we have somebody, literally saying, again, this idea that they're essentially anti-fascist, but what they're doing is fascist behavior, attacking the church, to the point to where they're calling for coordinated attacks. Not just a couple people to show up, but masses to show up in large, massive numbers, they write. Everyone armed. Don't vote, revolt. Now, this account has since been suspended, but there's tweets like this every single day that aren't. Why aren't they all taken down? Because it fits the narrative. It fits the Marxist narrative that so many on the left are behind right now. See, we used to have Republicans and Democrats in this country. We don't have that anymore. We have all the Democrats. There used to be pro-life Democrats that are out there. They don't exist. They've either switched sides and they're now Republicans or conservatives, or they've just been silenced and pushed out of the party, to the point to where now we have a Democratic Party that is just Democratic in name only, and it's really a home for leftists and Marxists. It is where radicalists are bred in this nation today. And they are now encouraging all-out attacks in massive numbers at churches with armed individuals. This is Biden's America. But statements like these aren't just happening on tweets. They're starting to happen in real life. The people that are tweeting these things are apparently getting some momentum behind them. And it's not just one or two people. There are literally dozens and dozens of tweets like this that you can find on Twitter or on other social media platforms of people posting content, encouraging this sort of behavior. And here's the thing, it's starting to happen. Check out this. This is a church here in Colorado. On the front doors, it looks like a beautiful building. I think this is a Catholic church, and somebody paints "My body, my choice." Another one here, they wrote, "If abortions aren't safe, neither are you. This one here, St. John Newman Catholic Church in Virginia. On their sign, on the brick part of their sign, someone spray painted, "This won't stop." When we see these things, whether it be the demonstrations in the churches, the graffiti on church walls, the tweets and the threats that are happening around this country, it's easy to get discouraged. And I just want to take a minute here towards the end of this episode, and I want to encourage you to not allow the left to win by falling into fear, by allowing this to create anxiety in you, by allowing this to discourage you, by causing you to maybe go to church less or to back off of your strongly held religious beliefs. In fact, I would encourage you to do the opposite. Celebrate more. Worship harder. Carry your Bible around more. This is the time that we should be doubling down on our faith, not just out of spite to another group that's out there, but because it's going to take your faith, it's going to take a strong faith in God in order to get through these times. We can't navigate this I don't see any way to navigate this, in my opinion, without the peace that I have because of my faith in Jesus. Now, look, I think that people of all religions should feel equally as frustrated by these events. They should be equally appalled by what the left is doing, by what this Marxist agenda is doing to try to disrupt religion. Because this isn't, certainly it's about Christianity, but I believe that every religion, every peaceful religious group that's out there is threatened if Christianity is threatened. If Christianity is not safe in the United States of America, then no religious belief is safe in the United States of America. And so it's important that I think that we, as Christians, that we learn how to stand up for what we believe in, that we learn how to defend our faith, that we learn how to take the necessary precautions. If your church doesn't have a security team, start having that conversation. Find some people to serve in that way. Share with them some of these video clips. Go through this and talk about how would we handle this if this happened at our church? What would we do? What would be our protocol in this situation? Do you have cameras at your church? Do you have, other measures in place to be able to protect your people and your flock from these things from happening? I would encourage you to take some time and think about that. Handle it practically, handle it, among the morale of your people so that they don't, get discouraged if something like this takes place. Even this week, I heard of several churches that have caught on fire that they suspect it's arson and they suspect it's some sort of attack. The story was too new for me to be able to bring it to you definitively that that's what happened, but most likely that is something that took place. We as Christians need to not be shocked by this. Look, there's been persecution against religious people for millennia. We have seen, Christians have seen other believers thrown in amphitheaters and, fed to lions and beasts and beheaded and burned at the stake. This shouldn't be new to us. Thank God that here in America, it has not gotten to the point to where those sorts of things are happening. But the way that we prevent that again from taking place is we stand strong now. This is not just a side issue. Religion is not just a side issue anymore. It has to be a central talking point in our politic, because if we don't have freedom of religion, then we are not free as people in this nation. This is Church and State. I'm your host, Lucas Miles. And until next time, stand strong and keep the faith.
If I am lost along the way, if I wander off onto a different trail, will you forgive me if I fail when I'm lost and derailed? Through wind and through rain, through trouble and pain, if ever my heart strains, will you